This is a long story, so sit back. To give some background, I'm from a city in the northeast of Scotland in the UK. What happened here didn't just affect me, but also two close friends, who for the purposes of this story, I'll call Sarah and Liam. We all used to work for a store called Urban Sound. I started there back in 2003, Sarah joined in 2006, and Liam joined us in 2007. The entire staff of the store was close-knit. We were all music and movie nerds, sharing the same interests and sense of humor. Every year over the Christmas period, we would take on temporary staff as extra help due to the volume of customers we got at that time. In 2007, one of our temps was Greg. This is his real name. Most of us hit it off with him pretty well. He was a young guy, passionate about music, especially Pink Floyd, which was a big win with Liam, who is one of the greatest guitarists I've ever met, and myself, as I grew up on Pink Floyd through my parents. Greg was also a budding filmmaker, and his love for movies seemed to match his love for music. We had a lot to talk about and became friends very quickly. It was rare to keep in touch with the temp staff after the Christmas period, but Greg was an exception. He didn't live in the same city as the rest of us, but he kept plenty of contact through texts and social media. He would come through to the city to hang out from time to time. Fast forward to Christmas 2008. By this point, Urban Sound had become Echo Entertainment, and Greg came back to work with us as a temp, particularly with me. I ran the stockroom, the busiest place at Christmas time, and I'd had a history of not-so-great helpers. I was happy to get someone I knew would work hard and that I could banter with. He could be a bit annoying at times, trying to force different live versions of Pink Floyd songs he found on the internet. I liked Pink Floyd, but I liked a lot of music, not just Floyd. Nevertheless, I thought to myself that he was young and passionate, and that was cool. Around this time, Greg started to put together a self-made Pink Floyd documentary, and he interviewed me and Liam for it. I had to admit he did a great job given the limited tools he had. Echo Entertainment closed in February 2009 due to the global credit crunch at the time. Even after Echo Entertainment closed, Greg and the rest of the staff kept in touch. We had all become very close working together. By the summer of 2010, Greg organized an Echo Entertainment reunion night out. Most of us who still lived in the city made it, and it was a really fun night. Greg stayed at my place afterward. He was preparing to go to America for his second year, working as a camp counselor for Camp America at Camp Horizon in Maine, Ohio. Since Echo closed, I had gotten a new job in entertainment retail, and that Christmas, Greg came to work there as a temp, which I was initially fine with. Moving into 2011, Greg started raising red flags, although at the time I didn't see them clearly. He claimed that while in America, he had gotten a job helping with editing and camera work on the show Burn Notice. I thought that was impressive and told him as much. It didn't seem unbelievable considering his talent in filmmaking. He also claimed he was working for Camp America in Florida, which he said led to his work on Burn Notice, as that's where it was filmed. Again, I thought it sounded plausible. Then, when Greg was back in Scotland in 2011, it was time for another Echo reunion, which Greg insisted on organizing. It bothered me that he wanted to be in charge since he technically didn't work there when Echo closed. He was only a temp. I grew tired of his constant posts on Facebook, making what was essentially a casual night out among friends seem like a huge deal. Still, I brushed it off, thinking he was just young and excitable. Around the same time, Greg and another friend who shared an interest in filmmaking spent a day scouting locations in the city for a potential film project. Greg told me afterward that they had big plans and ideas for the project, but when I spoke to my other friend, he told me Greg spent the entire day asking about favorite directors instead of focusing on the project. It made me think Greg was exaggerating things, but I still didn't see him as harmful. In 2012, Sarah, the friend I mentioned earlier, became closer to Greg. Sarah was nearly 6 feet tall, blonde, and one of the nicest people you could ever meet. She had a great sense of humor. She and I had become super close when we worked together, though it was always platonic. I saw her more as a sister. She'd come around to my place for dinner and movies, and I knew her friends and family. Greg and Sarah started hanging out too, going to the cinema together, and for a while it seemed harmless. But by Christmas of 2012, when Greg was back as a temp for the third year in a row, he began to annoy the other staff. During lunch breaks, he would brag about all the TV shows he had worked on during his summers in the States: Burn Notice, Criminal Minds, and even The Wire. Unfortunately, I didn't hear about this at the time because the others knew I was friendly with him and didn't want to seem like they were talking behind his back. When I did talk to him at work, things became awkward. He started speaking to me in a smug and condescending tone. It bothered me, especially since I was older and had a hand in getting him those temp jobs. There was another Echo night out planned, and the day before, Greg texted me to say that the plan for tomorrow was to go to a pub quiz, adding that it was my favorite. I don't go to pub quizzes for personal reasons, and all my friends knew that. It felt like Greg was implying that the others had planned to do something I wouldn't join. I was furious about the text and didn't go to the night out. Later, I found out there was no pub quiz and the others hadn't planned one. Greg had lied. When Liam came into the shop the next day to check on me, Greg stood beside him, answering everything I asked Liam, as if he was Liam's spokesperson. I was at work and couldn't lose my temper, but it was infuriating. Greg was obsessed with Liam's guitar talents, and it was starting to become unhealthy. Sarah began sensing my frustration with Greg. I was having anxiety every time I talked to him, knowing there was something wrong. But Sarah and Liam were still charmed by him. I tolerated him because I loved them both and didn't want to cause drama. In 2013, Greg claimed that his dad had a life-threatening stroke, which left him severely disabled. This turned out to be a lie, used to gain sympathy from Sarah and Liam. By 2014, Liam had moved back to town and Greg started phasing me out. He took Sarah, Liam, and another friend to 3 different Prince concerts around the country. At first, I was upset that I wasn't invited, but in hindsight, I'm relieved. Greg paid for all the tickets, and I started wondering where he was getting all his money from. When he wasn't working as a temp or at Camp America, he claimed to be a freelance photographer and video editor, but I never saw any evidence of him actually working. Yet he was traveling around the UK to concerts that cost hundreds of pounds. I grew suspicious, but I couldn't figure out how he was making his money. During this time, Sarah and Greg got closer, and my contact with them began to drift. Greg would come to my place and then tell me he was heading to Sweet Sarah's, and would imply that I wasn't part of their group. A lot of the time, he wasn't even going there. I eventually distanced myself from them, unfollowing their posts and keeping my own hidden. I decided I would be polite if I saw them in public, but otherwise stay away. I started looking into Greg's claims about his time in America. With the help of a friend who had lived in the States, I realized that none of Greg's stories added up. He had never worked for Camp America in Florida, and it was highly unlikely he was working on TV shows like he claimed. I began to suspect something darker, especially as he continued to post about extravagant concerts and trips. Then, in October 2018, I found out the truth. While at work, a friend ran up to me and shared that Greg had been in court. My first thought was tax evasion or copyright infringement, but I learned that it was for making videos of children. Between January and November 2017, Greg had been pretending to be a girl online, using YouTube and Omegle to groom young boys. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison, along with a 5-year sexual harm prevention order. He will be on the sex offenders register for life. I was furious, not just because of what he had done to those poor kids, but because I had been right all along. He was dangerous, and my friends had been fooled by him. I believe he was selling those videos on the dark web for profit. He had once casually mentioned the dark web to me, as if it were something everyone knew about. He was never as smart or talented as he tried to make us believe. He had only been using everyone, including my friends, for his own gain. Sarah and Liam were devastated. Sarah, the lovely, sweet person she is, had refused to believe it at first, thinking there must be some mistake, but she soon came to terms with the reality. It took a long time for us to get back to the close friendship we had before Greg came into our lives. Now, we've all moved on, but we still occasionally talk about how we were tricked by him. To this day, I keep my distance from people like Greg. I don't care how charming or talented they seem. It's taught me a valuable lesson about trust and deception. Back when I was in 8th to 10th grade, I was heavily involved in a small building server. Most of the members were around 15 to 17 years old, and I joined a group of builders who I'd Skype with for hours every weekend. We all became close pretty fast, and after a while, we trusted each other enough to follow one another on Instagram. One of the builders in my group, Peter, was in the same grade as me, and we began texting frequently. I'd heard rumors that Peter might have a crush on me, but he denied it, and I didn't think much of it. After all, this was just online, so I brushed it off. Things seemed fine at first, but over time, something started to feel off when I talked to him. He'd tell small lies, and I caught him in them more and more. That bothered me, so I decided it was time to distance myself and stop talking to him. A few months went by with no contact until one day, out of the blue, Peter texted me, saying he was planning to transfer to my high school so he could get in-state tuition for college. His plan was to live on his own and support himself while finishing high school. When I read the message, my stomach dropped. Something felt very wrong. I tried to stay calm and told myself his plan was crazy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was oddly convenient he had chosen my random suburb. Peter kept insisting that his plan would work and told me it was just a coincidence he was coming to my high school. I hoped he was bluffing, just messing with me because I had cut him off. But then he mentioned buying plane tickets and that he was coming to my town to visit some high schools. That's when I realized he had developed an unhealthy attachment to me. Peter wasn't bluffing. To my horror, I saw him post a picture on Snapchat at the airport. He asked if we could meet up, but of course I didn't want to. Later, I saw his Snapchat story where he was taking a tour of my high school, posting videos and pictures, probably hoping I'd notice. Thankfully, I was stuck at home with pneumonia and didn't have to face him in person. But for the next few days, I felt tense and constantly afraid he'd show up at my door. Thankfully, he didn't find where I lived and eventually flew back home without following through on his plan. The strangest part was that none of my old Minecraft group found his behavior creepy, which made me feel like I was the only one who thought it was weird. I thought rejecting the meetup and staying out of contact would be the end of it. But 2 years later, after I had committed to my dream college, Peter resurfaced. I still, somewhat stupidly, followed him on social media because I wanted some warning if he ever came near me again. Sure enough, Peter posted a picture in front of the library at my college and said he was thinking about transferring there. A few months after that, Peter found out I had a boyfriend, and for the first time in 2 years, he contacted me directly. He started asking strange questions, like if my boyfriend would protect me. Even though I knew better, I responded. After that, I finally blocked him and stopped following him on social media out of fear. Thankfully, he hasn't tried to contact me since. Looking back, I know I made mistakes. I was young, scared, and people around me kept telling me it wasn't a big deal. But to Peter, let's not meet again. Ever. The year was 2003. I was a 15-year-old boy living in a small city where it felt like everyone knew everyone. I was typically shy and often used the internet to meet new people. At that time, ICQ was still popular among teens in my area, and I spent late nights adding new people and chatting with them. I'd search by city and add people I knew from school. That's how I met her. Her name was Sarah. We started off with innocent conversations, just the usual, "Hey, what's up?" kind of thing. Sarah described herself as a 17-year-old girl with short brown hair, kind of nerdy. We hit it off pretty quickly. We had a lot in common, and I found it easy to open up to her. Still, I thought it was odd that I had never seen her around school, but she explained that she went to the Christian school, so that made sense. We continued chatting for a while, and eventually I gave her my home phone number. We talked regularly until she suggested hanging out sometime. Without thinking twice, I agreed, and we made plans for me to go over to her house, watch movies, and just hang out. The day finally came, and I made my way across town to the address she had given me. It was a small apartment building, and I was a little confused about how her family would fit in such a small place, but I climbed the stairs anyway. When I knocked, I was greeted by a woman, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s. I knew it was Sarah, but she looked nothing like she had described. Instantly, I felt uneasy, but I followed her into the apartment anyway. It was a small one-bedroom unit. Feeling awkward, I asked her if her parents were home, but she laughed and told me she lived there alone. I sat down on the couch trying to process the situation. Then she asked me if I drank, and I made a joke about drinking water. She poured me a glass of wine, but I didn't touch it. She popped in a bootleg copy of Finding Nemo and mentioned that her brother had gotten it for her while it was still in theaters, claiming he was some kind of hacker. I remember her giggling at that. She sat close to me, making me more uncomfortable, so I shifted down to the floor and leaned against the couch. That's when she straddled me from behind, saying I looked tense and offering to rub my back. She insisted she was good at it and could make me feel better. I leaned forward and politely declined, telling her I was fine and didn't need any help. I told her I should probably go. She pointed to her bedroom and suggested I stay the night, adding that she had never had a guy stay in her bed before. She kept making sexual advances, telling me how long it had been since she had been with anyone and how she just wanted to meet a nice guy like me. All the while, she kept touching my arms and face. Even though I was still a virgin, I knew she wasn't the one I wanted that experience with. I managed to talk my way out of the situation and finally left. In the days that followed, I received several messages from her apologizing and saying she missed me. Eventually, I gave in and responded, asking her why she had lied to me and what was going on with her. She explained that she struggled to make friends and didn't like people her own age. I felt bad for her, forgave her, and we made plans to meet in person again. That led to my last encounter with Sarah. I rode my bike to her apartment once more, but this time, I was greeted not just by her, but also by her parents. They introduced themselves and said it was nice to finally meet Sarah's boyfriend. They mentioned that they had heard so much about me, and I felt my heart racing as they told me how much she talked about me. Inside, I was panicking. I wasn't her boyfriend, but Sarah seemed so happy. Her parents were just there to pick something up and were on their way out when I arrived. I knew this was my chance to get out of there. I offered to carry the box her mom was about to pick up and took it downstairs to their car. Her mom smiled and said I was a keeper. After loading the box into their SUV, I got on my bike and made my escape, saying I was just stopping by to say hello and needed to get home. Sarah wrapped her arms around me and kissed my cheek before I rode off, confused and determined never to speak to her again. She sent me a few more messages and called my landline a few times, but we never spoke again. I still don't know what happened to her after that. I wonder why her parents didn't question my age, or if they were just okay with it. This happened when I was 16, 11 years ago. I'm sharing this story for the first time, and while all the interactions occurred online, I feel it's important to tell. For context, I'm female. It started when a friend introduced me to someone online who she said was a relative's friend. Many of my friends were chatting with him at the time, and my friend and I even video chatted with him once. Having a computer in my bedroom meant I could message him far more than my parents knew. Over time, our instant messaging conversations became increasingly sexual. He systematically manipulated me, convincing me to break up with my boyfriend and persuading me that I needed to run away from home. Looking back, I can see how thoroughly he had brainwashed my naive 16-year-old self. The plan was for my friend and me to meet him in New York. We arranged for me to sleep over at her house the night before our escape. That evening, we snuck our belongings outside under the pretense of going for a walk, intending to reach the bus station. When we realized we'd missed the bus, we returned to her house. Then came the twist. She backed out, but encouraged me to go alone. The next morning, I left a note for my parents and called a taxi. The driver, sensing something was wrong, carefully questioned me about my destination and who I was meeting. At the bus station, while I was purchasing my ticket, my father arrived like a force of nature. His parental intuition had led him to check the bus station, and he'd driven so fast his Astro van nearly tipped over. To this day, I'm deeply thankful I left that note. Back home, I broke down, finally understanding the magnitude of my mistake. My parents questioned me thoroughly and contacted the police. Months later, an FBI agent reached out, wanting to speak with me and examine my computer. He informed us they had detained someone they believed was the same predator who had lured other girls. I positively identified him from a photo. Though my friend had thoroughly wiped my computer, leaving little evidence of our conversations, they didn't need my testimony. They had other victims who had actually reached him. The aftermath proved how fortunate I was. I later learned the taxi driver had remained outside, suspecting I was running away, and had likely called the police. I'm eternally grateful for his vigilance. Perhaps most remarkably, after explaining everything to my boyfriend, we reconciled. We've now been married for 8 years and have a daughter of our own. You can be certain she'll never have a computer in her bedroom, and when she's old enough, I'll share this story with her. Looking back, I'm profoundly grateful for the note I left, my father's decisive action, and that caring taxi driver who looked out for a stranger. What could have been a tragedy became a valuable life lesson, one I'm determined to pass on to my daughter. This story takes place around 2005 to 2006, during the height of MSN Messenger's popularity, when I was 12 to 13 years old. It began when I met a girl in my grade. I'll call her Alice. She was overweight and often bullied, and I'd heard she had a difficult home life. Despite noticing some red flags about her emotional stability, I tried to be kind to her. One Friday after school, while waiting for my bus to my dad's house, Alice approached me. She persistently asked if I wanted to hang out at her grandparents' house, even though I explained I had plans to see a movie with my dad and siblings that night. After her continued insistence, I called my dad from the office, and to my surprise, he agreed, saying he'd pick me up around 7:30 for the movie. After walking around town briefly, we went to her house, where she immediately logged into MSN Messenger with me beside her. I noticed her contact list was full of unfamiliar names, and when I asked about them, she casually mentioned having many online friends, something I found strange even then. Almost instantly, messages started flooding in, particularly from someone she called James. His personal message read something like, "I love my sexy babe Alice," which made me increasingly uncomfortable. Alice explained that James was her 16-year-old boyfriend who lived a few hours away, though they'd never met in person. When she mentioned she was with a friend, he asked her to turn on her webcam, wanting to see if he knew me. Though uncomfortable, I didn't feel I could object since I barely knew her. She activated her webcam, but notably he kept his off. Then came the creepy comments, calling both of us hot, suggesting I remove my sweater, making inappropriate innuendos about us making out, and other suggestions I didn't fully understand at that age. When I questioned why he wouldn't turn on his webcam, Alice said he didn't have one. Growing increasingly suspicious, I suggested we go outside to play with her rabbit. James became visibly angry, manipulating Alice to stay online, but I went outside anyway. Later, Alice joined me outside, explaining they'd fought but reconciled. She mentioned he was planning to visit the following Friday and wanted us all to hang out. despite my never having directly spoken to him and barely knowing her. More red flags. The evening ended uneventfully when my dad picked me up. On Sunday, back at my mom's, I received an MSN friend request from an unfamiliar account with a typical middle school-style email address. Assuming it was a classmate, I accepted. Immediately, a message popped up. "Hey, sexy girl." It was James. I quickly blocked him. The next day, Alice approached me at lunch saying James had liked me and confirming his Friday visit. I made excuses about having to go to my dad's again. That Friday, our school went into lockdown. We sat in darkened classrooms, assuming it was a drill, until a vice principal pulled me aside afterward. In the office, I found a female police officer and the guidance counselor waiting. They asked if I knew Alice and James and then revealed the truth. James wasn't a teenager at all, but a man in his 40s. The full story emerged later through various sources. The man had arrived at school claiming to be Alice's uncle, citing an emergency. When the suspicious receptionist asked for proof, he became irate, even dragging my name into it, shouting that guinea pigs with hats knows who I am. When they refused to release Alice and asked him to leave, he became violent, forcing the school into lockdown. Though he wasn't charged, apparently due to mental instability, the incident was terrifying, especially considering what might have happened had he succeeded. I soon distanced myself from Alice, who continued engaging in risky behaviors even after this frightening experience. To that creepy internet predator who posed as a teenager, let's never meet again.